Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuaries channel. Tonight we slip in after closing hours. When the tour buses are gone, the gift shop is dreaming, and the hill of Göbeklitepe sits under a sky so dark it feels like a velvet lid pressed gently over your eyes. You can almost hear the stars. That faint electrical hush your brain insists is real when you are tired enough. And just so we are clear, you probably won't survive this in the way you think you will. Not because anything jumps out, but because your certainty about what humans should be doing at 12,000 years ago is about to get softly dismantled like cheap furniture. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments too, because I love imagining all of you listening in different rooms, different nights, different weather. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the edge of the site as if you have stepped onto the rim of a sleeping animal. The ground under your shoes is pale and chalky, and it gives off the faint smell of sun-baked stone even though the sun has been gone for hours. A breeze slides down from the ridge and brushes your arms with cool fingers, carrying the dry scent of wild thyme and that dusty mineral taste that gets in your mouth and makes you swallow twice, somewhere, far off. A dog barks once, then decides it is not worth the effort and falls quiet. Above you, the sky is a bowl of black glass pricked with cold points of light, and you realize you're doing that thing where you stop breathing for a second just to listen harder. In daylight, Göbeklitepe can feel like a museum exhibit laid open. The protective roof, the walkways, the information panels, the polite choreography of visitors. But at night, without the chatter, the hill reclaims its original tone. It is a mound with secrets, a rounded rise in southeastern Anatolia, and it is old in the way that makes your brain itch. The mainstream fact you carry in with you, like a flashlight in your pocket, is that this place dates to the pre-pottery Neolithic, around the 10th millennium BCE. That is not old for a building. That is older than pottery, older than metal, older than the first cities by thousands of years. When you say it in your head, it almost turns into a joke. Humans at that time are supposed to be wandering around with stone tools, eating what they can, sleeping light, not hauling limestone megaliths and carving animals into them like they are decorating a cathedral. You step forward carefully, because even the gravel feels like it wants to announce you. Your soles crunch softly. Then you slow your pace until your feet barely whisper. It is strange how your body knows to behave differently in the dark, like you are sneaking into your own past. The roof structure over the main excavation area is a pale shape against the sky, and beneath it, the T-shaped pillars stand like a group of tall, patient silhouettes. They do not loom exactly. Looming implies effort. These just are, like they have been waiting so long that waiting has become their natural state. You reach the first railing and rest your hands on it, fingers curling around the cool metal. Your skin notices the temperature immediately, and your mind does that sleepy zoom-in thing, focusing on sensation as if it is a story. Down below, the stone circles sit in their excavated hollows, each enclosure a ringed space, each pillar a fixed presence. The moon is not full, but there is enough light to draw edges. The tops of the pillars catch it, the way a knife edge catches a street lamp, and the carved reliefs become faint shadows over pale surfaces. You let your eyes adjust. In the dark, details come slowly, like memories you're trying to pull up from the bottom of a lake. A pillar's side looks smooth at first, then you notice a fox, or maybe it is a wild dog, its body in profile, its legs stretched as if it is running forever along the stone. Another pillar hints at a snake, a thin line that your eyes trace almost reluctantly. You swallow again, and you can taste the dust. It is grounding in a strange way. This is not a digital reconstruction. This is not a documentary graphic. This is a real hill, real limestone. And you are standing above something that predates so many human habits that your own life starts to feel like a brief sneeze. You breathe in, slow, and you imagine the people who came here. Not kings, not priests in embroidered robes, not city administrators with clay tablets. These are hunter-gatherers, people whose whole world is built out of movement, seasons, animals, water sources, and the stories that bind them into groups. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe was primarily a temple, a ritual gathering place, a social hub, or something that refuses all modern categories. That debate is part of the night air here, like a second breeze. Every time you think you have the label pinned down, the stones shift their meaning slightly and slip away. You lean closer over the railing, and your eyes find the two tall central pillars inside one enclosure, standing opposite each other like paired sentinels. Even from here, you can sense their symmetry. Their T-shape is not accidental, not functional in a basic hold-up-a-roof way. Because there is no clear evidence a roof covered these open circles. The T-shape suggests something else, something symbolic. And that leads you into the quirky tidbit that always buzzes around this place. The pillars may represent stylized human figures. Some have carved arms and hands, with a belt or loincloth, implying bodies. At night, the idea lands differently. You feel it in your spine. If these are figures, then you are not looking at architecture. You are looking at a gathering of presences, a crowd made of stone. You let that thought sit, because it is heavy, and you're trying not to drop it. The silence helps. You can hear your own breathing, the tiny rustle of your clothes when you shift your weight. A moth flutters near a light somewhere on the edge of the site, and its wings make the smallest tapping sound as it hits the fixture and backs off. Your mind, ever helpful, decides to imagine that the moth is the site's last remaining night watchman. It is doing a terrible job. Honestly, the only thing it is guarding is a light bulb. You close your eyes for a second and picture the hill before it was excavated. For most of modern history, it was just a mound. Farmers plowed nearby. Shepherds moved their flocks. The stones beneath remained hidden, not because they were buried by time alone, but because at some point long ago, people deliberately filled these enclosures in with rubble and soil. That is one of the strangest facts about Göbeklitepe. Someone built these circles, used them, and then carefully buried them. It is like writing a book and then sealing it in a wall. You do not do that accidentally. You do it with intention. You open your eyes again and let the moonlight return. The night makes the pillars feel less like archaeological finds and more like a place you are trespassing. Your body tightens a little. Not with fear exactly, but with that sense of being in a room where important things once happened. You imagine torches, their flames snapping in the wind, casting moving shadows on the carved animals. You imagine voices, not in a language you recognize, but in rhythms you can almost feel. You imagine drums made from stretched hide, the thump matching a heartbeat, and you realize something unsettling. Even if you cannot decode the meaning, you can recognize the behavior. Humans gathering, humans making a place special, humans stepping out of daily survival and into something that feels bigger than the next meal. A tiny laugh slips out of you, quietly, because you catch yourself thinking, wow, spiritual awakening at midnight, how original. If your past self could see you now, they would absolutely roast you. But the hill does not care. The stones do not care. They have seen thousands of dawns. They have sat through storms that would make your modern weather app scream in capital letters. They have listened to silence long enough to make it an art form. You shift your gaze across the enclosures. Each circle is slightly different, and you can sense the shape of a complex site beyond what is visible. Only a portion has been excavated. That fact always feels like a cliff edge for the imagination. You are looking at what we have uncovered, but beneath the ground there may be more circles, more pillars, more carvings, more questions. Your mind tries to fill them in, like a kid coloring outside the lines. You picture a whole honeycomb of sacred spaces under the mound, layered and patient. You picture the people returning season after season, telling their children. We go to the hill, we do the thing, and the child asking, "Why?" And the adult saying, "Because we always have." The oldest reason on earth. You take one slow breath and let it out through your nose. You want to anchor yourself in what we do know, the mainstream, grounded history. Göbeklitepe was discovered in the modern era, and excavations revealed monumental stone circles with richly carved T-pillars, dating back roughly 12,000 years, making it one of the earliest known monumental ritual sites. That much stands. But then the night invites the questions. Were these circles for worship, for initiation rituals, for feasting, for negotiation between groups? Were they a place to remember the dead, to honor animals, to map the sky, to tell stories that kept the world from falling apart? Historians still argue whether the symbolism points to a shared religious system or a more fluid set of traditions that change with each gathering. You blink slowly, and your eyelids feel heavy, like they have tiny stones in them. That is good. This is a sleep walk-through, after all. You are not here to solve Göbeklitepe like a puzzle. You're here to walk beside it, to let the night soften the edges of certainty and allow wonder to seep in. You let your shoulders drop. You loosen your jaw. You stop trying to understand and start letting the place wash over you. The wind shifts again, and for a second it sounds like whispering. Your brain wants to make words out of it, because your brain is obsessed with patterns. You almost hear a name. You almost hear a warning. Then it passes, and it is just air moving over a hill. Still, the feeling lingers, and you glance once more at the central pillars, those two tall forms facing each other across the circle, as if locked in an eternal conversation. You think, in the simplest way, maybe the first temple is not a building. Maybe it is a decision, a choice to gather, to carve, to mark a place, to say, here, in this circle of stone, we are more than hunger. And as you stand there, quiet and small under the stars, you feel the hill agree with you, not in words, but in weight, in age, in the steady patience of things that outlast explanations. You stay at the railing a moment longer, because leaving the first view feels like turning your back on a sleeping giant. Then you begin to walk, slow enough that your footsteps barely crunch, as if you are trying not to wake the hill. The walkway curves, and the roof above you becomes a pale canopy against the night, a modern wing over an ancient body. Your fingers trail along the handrail again, partly for balance, partly because the cool metal keeps you anchored in the present. It is too easy, out here, to let your mind fall backward until you forget what century your lungs belong to. The air smells different as you move. Less sun-baked chalk now, more dry grass and the faint sourness of disturbed soil. Somewhere below the ridge, a night insect keeps a steady, almost mechanical rhythm, like it is running a tiny engine. You realize, with sleepy amusement, that this is the original white noise machine. Nature invented it first, and it does not even charge a subscription. You round a bend, and the mound itself becomes clearer. Göbeklitepe is not a dramatic cliff or a mountain. It is a belly of earth, a rounded swelling on the landscape, and that is part of the weirdness. If you did not know what was under it, you might never guess. That is one of the mainstream facts that matters tonight. This site was hidden for millennia under its own fill and overburden. Not a ruin sticking up like an obvious monument. It waited quietly under the skin of the hill, like a thought you have but do not speak aloud. For a long time, people walked over it, plowed nearby, lived their ordinary lives, completely unaware they were crossing the lid of something extraordinary. You pause at a point where you can look out beyond the site. The horizon is low and wide, and the darkness makes the landscape feel even more open. In the distance, you see a scatter of lights from modern settlements, tiny amber dots that tremble in the air like they are shy. You think about how those lights are the latest layer of human presence here. Before electricity, there were oil lamps. Before that, torches. Before that, maybe just starlight and the pale glow of fire. The idea that humans have been looking out into this same broad plain for so long makes your chest feel both warm and hollow at the same time. You keep walking, and now your mind starts doing that thing where it asks, how did this place stay hidden? Not in a mystical sense, but in a practical one. The answer is part accident, part intention. Historians still argue whether the burial of the enclosures was meant as a kind of ritual closure, a protective act, or simply a pragmatic way to reshape the hill for new purposes. What is less debated is that the filling happened in a deliberate manner. The enclosures were not swallowed by a sudden landslide. They were packed with stones, rubble, soil, and debris, as if someone carefully poured time into them until the circles disappeared. That choice is why you can stand here now and still see carvings sharp enough to feel like they were cut last week. A faint chill moves through you, and you pull your arms closer to your body. Night at an elevated site does that. You think about the people who might have stood here in the 10th millennium BCE, feeling the same temperature drop after sunset, listening to the same wind, seeing the same stars. Their clothing is different. Their fears are different. Their world is smaller in some ways and bigger in others, but the cold on skin is universal. The way you tuck your chin down when a breeze hits your throat is universal too. You smile to yourself, because it is comforting to know you share at least that with someone 12,000 years ago. The ancient and the modern both go, "Ugh, it is chilly," and continue anyway. The path takes you to a quieter angle of the excavation. In daylight, guides point and explain. At night, it feels like you are touring a memory. Your eyes follow the outlines of stones, and the gaps between them feel as important as the stones themselves. You can see where the earth has been cut away, where layers have been peeled back like pages. Archaeology is basically slow, careful time travel. Except instead of a DeLorean, you get trowels and notebooks, and the emotional resilience to spend years watching dirt. A lot of dirt. Honestly, if patience was a superpower, archaeologists would be unstoppable villains. You stop again, and you let your gaze drop to the soil. Even in low light, you can sense its texture. Tiny pebbles, chalk fragments, darker bands where organic material once sat. You imagine the process of excavation, scraping, brushing, documenting. The mainstream historical fact that circles through your head is that Göbeklitepe's discoveries helped reshape the old narrative that agriculture came first, then cities, then temples. Here, it looks like monumental building and organized ritual might be appearing before full-scale farming. It is like finding a chapter of human history out of order. Your brain hates that, because your brain loves neat sequences. But this hill does not care about your timeline anxiety. And then, Because you are human, you immediately go hunting for a story to make the out-of-order chapter feel comfortable. Maybe you think this place was a magnet, a gathering point. Groups of hunters and foragers scattered across the region, converging seasonally. They would bring their skills, their meat, their stories, their tensions, their alliances. They would meet here, on this hill, and do something that required a lot of bodies and a shared purpose. And that leads you into one of the biggest debates. Was Göbeklitepe evidence of a centralized authority? Some kind of early priestly class organizing labor? Or was it a communal project, built through cooperation and shared belief, without a top-down hierarchy? Historians still argue whether the scale of construction implies leadership structures or whether social bonds and ritual obligation were enough. You listen to the night again, as if it might answer. It does not. It only gives you wind and insects and the occasional distant bark. That silence is a kind of permission. It lets you imagine without being corrected. You walk on, and a memory of daylight intrudes. You recall how the site looks under the sun, pale stone, sharp edges, visitors leaning over railings with phones raised. At night, there are no phones glowing like tiny rectangles of distraction. It is just you and the hill in the dark. You catch yourself wanting to take a picture anyway, as if your mind has been trained to document everything. Then you laugh softly, because you realize how ridiculous that is. As if the hill needs your camera roll, as if Göbeklitepe, with its 12,000 years of patience, is sitting there thinking, "Please, I hope someone posts me on social media tonight." You slow your breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. You feel your heartbeat settle. The goal is not excitement. The goal is that gentle, drifting curiosity that makes sleep feel like a soft slide rather than a fall. Your path brings you near a spot where the mound's surface rises slightly, and you can sense the thickness of what still lies underground. Only a fraction of the site has been excavated, and that fact always feels like standing in front of a locked door. You can see the keyhole. You can guess what might be inside, but you cannot open it. Not yet. Maybe not ever in your lifetime. That is both frustrating and strangely soothing. The world still has secrets, even in an age where you can look up almost anything. There are places that keep their answers under layers of earth. You crouch briefly. Not to touch anything, just to feel closer to the ground. The soil radiates a faint coolness. You imagine hands filling these enclosures long ago, hauling baskets of rubble, dumping them, tamping them down. It is not glamorous work. It is repetitive, dusty, exhausting, and yet the very act of burying suggests meaning. The quirky tidbit you let yourself hold is that some people interpret the deliberate backfilling as a ritual act, a closing of a sacred space, like sealing a jar after a ceremony. Others see it as practical, a way to stabilize structures or repurpose the area. Historians still argue whether that burial is best understood as reverence, abandonment, or transformation. You stand back up slowly, joints creaking in a way that makes you feel personally attacked by time. You whisper to yourself, 12,000 years, and I am the one making noises. And the joke lands quietly. Just for you. As you continue along the walkway, you notice how the mound feels less like a single site and more like a layered archive. A place that has been edited, built, used, buried, built again, perhaps. And the night makes those edits feel intimate, like you are reading someone's diary by flashlight. You're not supposed to, but you cannot stop. You reach another vantage point, and the pillars come back into view, their T-shapes catching faint moonlight. Your earlier thought returns. Maybe this is not just a ruin. Maybe it is a memory made of stone. And the fact that it stayed hidden for so long only adds to its power. It waited through empires, religions, languages, borders. It waited until the modern world was ready to be confused by it. You stand there, letting the silence wrap around you like a blanket, and you feel your eyelids grow heavier again. The hill is patient. The night is patient. You can be patient too. Step by step, you keep moving deeper into the dark, deeper into the question that hums under every stone. What did humans become when they decided to gather here? You keep walking, and the mound starts to feel less like a place you visit and more like a place that visits you back. The night air presses softly against your cheeks, cool and dry, and your breath fogs only in your imagination because this is not a winter fairy tale. It is a hill that simply refuses to be warm after dark. The walkway guides you forward, but your mind slips sideways into the past, because Göbeklitepe has a talent for turning your thoughts into footprints. You picture a time when there is no railing, no roof, no informational panel telling you what to think. Just a rise in the landscape and a decision. You imagine a small group approaching from the plain, moving carefully through scrub and stone. They are not villagers yet, not in the way you picture villages, but they are not isolated either. They have roots, familiar stopping points, seasonal habits. They know where the gazelle run, where the water sits after rains, where certain plants push up in spring. Their world is stitched together by knowledge and gossip, and the quiet authority of elders who have seen enough winters to speak with weight. And then you imagine them looking up at this hill and choosing it. The mainstream fact that steadies you is simple and stubborn. Göbeklitepe's earliest phases date to a time when people in this region are still primarily hunter-gatherers, in what archaeologists call the pre-pottery Neolithic. That matters because it flips the old story. The old story says people settle, farm, build permanent homes, then invent big communal monuments. Here, the monument comes early. Like a drumbeat before the song has fully started, you let that settle in your chest. Monument first, temple first, maybe, or at least gathering first. You step along the path and try to make it real. Not as a headline, but as a human scene. The group approaches carrying what they can. Stone tools tucked in belts, hides rolled tight, bundles of dried meat, maybe a few precious items that mean something beyond survival. Their footsteps are quieter than yours. Their eyes are sharper, and their shoulders are used to carrying weight without complaining about it on social media. Meanwhile, you carry one backpack and act like you have been forced to drag a refrigerator uphill. Respectfully, you're not built for the 10th millennium BCE. You stop where the ground drops away into the excavated space, and you let your gaze drift over the circles again. You imagine the site not as ruins, but as an active place. Fires flicker nearby. People gather in clusters. Some are newcomers. Some are familiar faces. There are greetings that are more than words, touches on shoulders, shared food, exchanged glances that say, "You made it through the season?" In a world without permanent walls, gatherings like this become the walls. They hold society together. This is where the idea that hunting camps could become holy ground begins to feel less abstract. Maybe the hill starts as a meeting place for practical reasons. It is visible from afar. It sits in a landscape that multiple groups can reach. It has symbolic weight because it is high, because it is different, because it feels like it belongs to the sky a little more than the plain does. And then, once a place becomes a habit, habit becomes tradition, and tradition becomes meaning. You know how it works. You go to the same coffee shop once, then twice, then suddenly you have a spot, and now you are emotionally attached to a chair like it is your soulmate. Multiply that by a few thousand years and some carved limestone, and here we are. You let yourself drift into the soundscape you cannot hear, but can almost feel. A low murmur of voices, the scrape of stone on stone as tools are sharpened, the thump of something heavy being dragged, the soft crackle of fire, and under it all, the tension between daily survival and something else. Something that does not feed you directly, but might feed the part of you that needs belonging. Historians still argue whether places like Göbeklitepe were a cause of early sedentism and agriculture, or a result of it beginning elsewhere. Did ritual gatherings create the need for more reliable food supplies, nudging people toward cultivation? Or did early experiments with planting and managing wild grains already exist, allowing larger gatherings to happen? You can feel how the debate hinges on a simple human problem. If you invite a lot of people to the hill, you have to feed them. And feeding people is either a joyous communal act or a logistical nightmare, depending on how many baskets of grain you personally had to carry. You imagine a feast, not as a fantasy banquet, but as a real surge of calories and celebration. Roasted meat, the fat sizzling and popping, the scent heavy in the air, nuts and gathered plants, bitter and sweet. Maybe wild cereals processed into something resembling porridge or bread. The thought makes your stomach notice itself. It is rude. Honestly, you are trying to be spiritually transported and your body is like, cool. But snacks? Your body has priorities. Your body is a tiny accountant. Now your mind slides into the practical miracle. Building. You look at the pillars and you think about hands, muscle, coordination. Limestone can be shaped with stone tools, yes, but it still requires patience and skill. The pillars are not random boulders. They are carefully carved, moved, placed. It implies planning, shared effort, and the kind of social glue that makes people do hard work for a goal they will not finish alone. And this is where the hill gets cheeky again. Because if you accept that hunter-gatherers can build something like this, you have to accept that hunter-gatherer does not mean simple or scattered or incapable of big ideas. It means flexible. It means mobile. It means their architecture might be social rather than domestic. Their permanence might be in gatherings rather than houses. You shift your weight and let your eyes rest on the curve of one enclosure. You imagine it as a stage. The central pillars are the focal point, and the ring of smaller pillars is the audience, or the community, or the boundary that turns ordinary space into special space. You can almost feel how stepping into the circle would change your posture. You would lower your voice. You would move with intention. You would do the thing you came to do, whether that is honoring ancestors, negotiating alliances, telling sacred stories, or trying to impress someone from the neighboring group who has excellent hair and a suspiciously confident spear. The quirky tidbit that drifts into your head is one that always makes this place feel slightly uncanny. Some researchers suggest that the imagery on the pillars could encode myths or clan symbols, like a visual language that signals identity across groups. A fox here might mean one lineage, a boar another, a snake another. It is not proven, but it is the kind of possibility that makes your imagination sit up straighter. If the carvings function as social signals, then Göbeklitepe is not just spiritual, it is political. It is a billboard, a stone handshake, the original group chat, except you cannot mute it. You move again, and the night seems to deepen, as if the sky is leaning closer to listen. You feel the rhythm of your steps, slow and steady, and you let them become a kind of meditation. You think about how a place becomes sacred, not by magic, not by a lightning bolt from the heavens, but by repetition, by agreement, by the way people return again and again and pour attention into a spot until the spot holds it. Historians still argue whether the first temples are best understood as religious institutions in the modern sense, or as communal spaces where social cohesion is reinforced through ritual performance. In other words, are you looking at worship, or are you looking at community maintenance? And of course, it can be both, because humans are rarely neat. You can pray and network at the same time. You can fear the unseen and also plan next season's hunting route. Multitasking is not new. You have been doing it forever, just with fewer notifications. You glance down and toward the circles one more time and imagine a moment when the hill is crowded, torches flaring, shadows dancing across carved animals. Someone speaks, and the group answers. Someone sings, and the sound lifts into the night. The stars above witness it all, indifferent and glittering. And you feel in your quiet modern body how plausible it is that the drive to gather, to mark a place, to perform meaning together, could be as old as hunger itself. You inhale slowly. The air tastes like stone and dry grass. Your eyelids droop. Your mind softens at the edges. The hill does not demand conclusions. It only invites you to keep walking, step by step, deeper into the idea that before fields and fences, before villages and kings, humans might have built something not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because the night is wide, the world is uncertain, and sometimes you need a circle of stone to remind you that you are not alone. You continue along the walkway, and the sight seems to pull you closer to the carvings, like it knows exactly what will keep you awake just long enough to be deliciously sleepy. The rail turns, the angle changes, the moonlight catches different faces of the stone, and suddenly the pillars stop being abstract shapes and start being creatures again. Not living creatures, not moving ones, but carved presences with eyes you cannot quite see and mouths you cannot quite trust. The air is still dry, but it carries a faint metallic tang now, as if the night itself has a taste. You lick your lips and get dust, which is honestly the sight's way of saying, welcome, you're part of this now. You slow your steps even more, almost gliding, and your shoulders relax the way they do when you stop trying to control the moment. Up close, the animal reliefs feel like a secret language. In daylight, you can admire them like art. At night, they feel like warnings scratched into stone by someone who did not have time to explain. A fox stretches along one pillar, its body sleek, its tail curling, as if it is caught mid-run forever. A boar looks sturdier, heavier, like a blunt opinion. Snakes ripple in lines that your eyes follow involuntarily, because humans have been programmed for thousands of years to notice snakes. You could be half asleep and still snap awake if something long and curvy moves near your foot. That is just your ancient brain doing its job. Thank you, ancient brain. Very considerate. Here is your mainstream fact for this stretch of the night. Göbeklitepe's pillars are decorated with a menagerie of animals, carved in relief with impressive skill for such an early period. And many of those animals are species that were present in the region. Foxes, wild boar, snakes, birds, insect, and more. They are not random doodles. They are repeated motifs, placed with intention, and they imply that these builders had both the time and the cultural reason to carve their world into stone. But why these animals? That question is where the night becomes slippery. Historians still argue whether the animals represent totems, spirits, myths, clan identities, warnings, or simple storytelling. Some see them as symbolic guardians of a ritual space. Others see a narrative, a world of dangerous creatures, a reminder of the untamed environment outside the circle. And then there are interpretations that feel like half dream, half hypothesis. Animals as metaphors for human qualities. Foxes for cunning. Boars for brute force. Snakes for transformation. You can feel your mind reaching for meaning like your hand, reaching for a railing in the dark. You stop at a spot where a pillar's carvings are more visible. The moonlight falls across the stone at an angle that makes the relief pop. The animal looks like it's stepping out of the rock, and for a moment your heart gives a tiny, ridiculous jump. As if the stone might lunge, you snort softly at yourself. Congratulations, you have been mildly intimidated by geology. You let your gaze drift across another set of carvings. Birds appear often here, and at night they feel eerie. A bird is a creature that crosses boundaries, earth and sky, life and death, scavenging and soaring. There is a particular type of bird often mentioned in discussions of early Neolithic symbolism, the vulture, and that leads you to a fringe-tinged tidbit that always raises eyebrows. Some researchers connect the prevalence of birds, especially vultures, in early Anatolian and Near Eastern art to mortuary practices, possibly involving exposure of bodies to scavengers. Not here in a graphic sense, not as a horror movie, but as a ritual idea, letting the sky take the dead. Whether Göbeklitepe itself was used for such practices is debated, but the association between vultures and death rituals appears at other Neolithic sites too. The night makes you feel that boundary. Not fear, exactly, more like respectful unease, the way you feel standing near a grave even if you do not know whose it is. You breathe in and out slowly. The goal is calm. The goal is that floaty ASMR trance where facts and imagination can share the same pillow. You take another step and notice a small carved shape that could be an insect. An insect. Imagine being so committed to symbolism that you carve bugs into limestone. That is either devotion or the ancient version of, I just think they're neat. You smile, because it reminds you that people back then were not stiff museum mannequins. They were humans with attention, humor, and probably opinions about what animals deserved to be immortalized. The carvings, though, are not just pretty. They feel strategic. You look at the placement. Some animals face inward, toward the circle, as if watching what happens inside. Others stretch along the sides, as if circling the space. It gives you the impression of boundaries, like the enclosure is a protected bubble and the animals are the membrane. And that makes you wonder, what happens inside that requires protection? Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's enclosures were primarily for ritual performances, for feasting and social gatherings, or for something more specific like initiation ceremonies or seasonal rites. At night, you can imagine all of it. You can imagine a rite of passage where a young hunter is brought into the circle and told the stories behind each animal. You can imagine elders pointing at a snake carving and saying, "Remember, it sheds its skin. You can change, but only if you survive." And yes, you can imagine the young hunter thinking, "Cool speech. But can we eat now?" Humans never stop being humans. You shift your gaze again, and you notice how the animals are not carved with equal emphasis. Some are bold and dominant. Some are smaller, tucked into corners. That variation feels like hierarchy. Maybe certain animals matter more to certain groups. Maybe some are seasonal. Maybe the carvings record a calendar of hunts. Or maybe they record myths that you cannot decode because you are missing the key. The spoken stories that once wrapped around these stones like smoke around a fire. The night wind slides through the open spaces of the modern roof and makes a soft, hollow sound, almost like a low flute note. It startles you for half a second, and then you relax again. You remind yourself it is just air, not spirits, not aliens, not your sleep paralysis, demon clocking in early. Just wind doing wind things. Still, your imagination, being the greedy little creature it is, wants to take the carvings and build a whole cosmology. And that is where the fringe claims begin to shimmer at the edge of your thoughts, like mirages. Some people look at the animal reliefs and insist they are star maps. Others claim they are coded messages about catastrophes, comets, lost civilizations. The night makes those ideas feel tempting because the sky is right there, heavy with stars, and you can feel how easy it would be to connect everything into one grand pattern, but you keep your feet on the walkway, literally and mentally. The carvings can be meaningful without being supernatural. Humans are fully capable of inventing deep symbolism all by themselves. No outside help required. We are overachievers like that. You lean slightly, looking down into an enclosure again, and you imagine the animals not as decoration, but as participants. The fox is watching. The snake is listening. The boar is judging you. The bird is waiting. It is like a council of non-human witnesses. And that fits, because if you are living in a world where animals are both your food and your danger, both your competition and your companions, then of course you carve them. Of course you give them a seat at the table of your rituals. Your eyelids feel heavier now, and you let them dip, then open again. You're not fighting sleep. You are letting sleep walk beside you, like a quiet friend. You take one more slow breath and let your eyes rest on a final carving, something sinuous and sharp. You imagine the hand that made it, the focus required, the patience, the decision to put meaning into stone, not because it was practical, but because it mattered. And as you stand there, bathed in thin moonlight and surrounded by carved beasts that do not blink, you feel the soft, unsettling possibility that you are the one being observed. Not by ghosts, not by gods, but by the sheer weight of human intention. The animals in the stone remind you that this place was alive with stories long before you arrived, and it will keep those stories long after you leave. You turn your head toward the next curve of the walkway, ready to follow the carvings deeper into the hill's quiet logic, and the night seems to lean forward with you, eager to show you what else it has been holding. You move on, but the carved animals cling to your thoughts like burrs on fabric. Fox, snake, bird, boar, each one feels like a word you cannot translate, and then the walkway brings you back toward the heart of the enclosures, toward the arrangement that always steals the oxygen from a room, even an outdoor room under a roof. The two tall central pillars. You stop, and you let your eyes settle on them the way you let your eyes settle on someone you are trying to read. Their silhouettes are clean, almost minimalist, like modern sculpture, which is deeply unfair because it makes them look contemporary. But they are ancient, and the contrast makes your brain stutter. The T-shape is simple, but the simplicity is the point. It turns them into figures without faces, bodies without heads, or maybe heads without bodies, depending on which direction your imagination decides to panic. Here is your mainstream fact for this section of the walk. In several of Göbeklitepe's circular enclosures, two larger T-shaped monoliths stand at the center, facing each other, and some of these pillars bear carved details that resemble human arms, hands, belts, and loincloths, suggesting they may represent stylized anthropomorphic beings rather than purely structural supports. Even saying that out loud feels like you are lighting a candle in a cave. Anthropomorphic, human-shaped. The idea lands softly but firmly. At night, it lands even harder. You lean forward over the railing, and the two central pillars seem to lean back, not physically, but in your perception. They dominate the circle. The smaller pillars around the edge feel like attendants, like an audience, like ribs around a heart. The central pair feel like the focus of whatever happened here. And because you're standing here in the dark, when your brain is extra suggestible, your mind starts to supply posture and personality. You begin to see them as two presences in conversation, silent but charged. You imagine stepping down into the enclosure. Your shoes would hit packed earth, not museum decking. The smell would be stronger. Smoke, sweat, meat, crushed herbs underfoot. You would feel the circle close around you. The ring of pillars would block the horizon, narrowing your world into stone and shadow. And then you would face the two tall figures. No faces, no eyes, just the clean-cut T-shape and carved arms folded along their sides like they are calmly waiting for you to speak first. You swallow. Your throat feels dry. You laugh quietly, because you are aware of how dramatic your brain is being. You are literally being intimidated by two slabs of limestone that have been standing still longer than any human institution you can name. You whisper to yourself, "Okay, fine." You win, as if the stones are in competition with you. They are not. They are not even aware you exist. And yet, you feel judged anyway, which is honestly a talent. Historians still argue whether these central pillars represent deities, ancestors, mythical beings, or symbolic persons that embody something like the community itself. The debate matters because it touches the biggest question: what kind of mind built this? If the pillars are people, then the enclosures are not just spaces. They are scenes. They are arrangements of beings. That implies ritual. That implies narrative. That implies a spiritual or social framework strong enough to organize labor on a massive scale. You shift your stance, trying to find a comfortable way to stand at the railing without feeling like you are eavesdropping. The moonlight slides across the stone and you catch hints of carved bands that might be belts. You imagine the belts holding pouches, tools, symbols of status. You imagine the loincloth detail, which is both fascinating and slightly funny because it makes the pillars feel unexpectedly personal. Like, yes, ancient monumental being. Nice outfit, very classic, very timeless. And that thought brings your first little joke of this stretch. If these are sacred figures, they're also the oldest known example of someone insisting on a specific fashion silhouette. T-shaped, accessorized, and absolutely refusing to go out of style. You smile in the dark, because humor is a way of touching the uncanny without getting burned. You keep looking, and you notice how the pillars face each other. That facing is important. It is not random. It creates an axis, a relationship, a tension. It makes you imagine that whatever happened in the enclosure was oriented around that relationship, like a stage play where the main actor stands center and everyone else forms the chorus. You let yourself drift into a scene. The circle is full. People stand or sit along the edges, backs against smaller pillars. Firelight flickers. Shadows move. Someone steps into the open space between the central pair. Maybe it is an elder. Maybe it is a ritual specialist. Maybe it is simply whoever has the confidence to walk into the middle and not trip. They raise their hands. They speak. The crowd answers. And the central pillars, silent and massive, hold the moment like a container. Now your mind nudges in a quirky tidbit that gets whispered about in sleepy documentaries and late-night forum threads. Some people call the central pillars watchers. Not in an alien way, not necessarily, but as a poetic shorthand for how they feel. They stand, they observe, they outlast, In the dark, you understand why that nickname sticks. There is something about faceless figures that makes you project awareness onto them. Your brain hates blankness. It wants eyes, so it paints invisible eyes onto stone. You blink slowly, and you feel sleep tugging at your edges like a gentle tide. You let it tug. You're not here to stay sharp. You're here to drift. The wind shifts, and the modern roof above makes a soft creak, like a ship's hull settling. For a moment you imagine the roof is not there, and the enclosure is open to the sky the way it may have been originally. If these circles were open air, then the central pillars would have been framed by stars. Imagine standing in the circle at night, torchlight flickering, and seeing the tall T-shapes silhouetted against constellations. That would be a powerful visual. That would imprint itself on your mind. That would make the pillars feel like bridges between earth and sky. Historians still argue whether astronomy played a role in the site's design. Some see alignments, others caution against forcing patterns. But the possibility hangs there. And even if there were no precise star alignments, the simple fact remains: the sky is part of every ancient ritual because the sky is unavoidable. It is the biggest ceiling humanity has ever had. You let your gaze drift down again to the base of the pillars. The stone looks rooted, as if it grew out of the earth. You think about the labor of extracting these monoliths from nearby limestone bedrock, shaping them, moving them. That work would require coordination and social organization. It would require people to agree on a goal. And that circles back to the question that hums under your ribs. What made them agree? Was it fear, reverence, a need for unity, a desire to impress neighboring groups, a hunger for meaning, maybe all of it? Humans are rarely driven by one thing. You can be hungry and holy at the same time. You can be practical and symbolic in the same breath. You feel a sudden soft wave of gratitude, oddly. Not for the mysteries, exactly, but for the proof that humans have always been capable of big, strange beauty, even before agriculture, before cities, before writing. People were making monumental statements. They were carving beings into stone. They were building circles that demanded attention. They were saying, in their own language, "This matters." Your second little joke arrives quietly. If your modern to-do list ever makes you feel productive, remember these folks were out here in 9500 BCE dragging megaliths uphill without even the promise of coffee afterward. Your email can wait. The ancient builders are still flexing. You stand there a moment longer, letting your eyes rest on the central pair until the shapes blur slightly at the edges. Sleep makes everything softer. The pillars become less like objects and more like silhouettes in a dream. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders drop. You feel the night wrap around you, and in that softened state, you allow one more thought to bloom. If these pillars are persons, then the enclosure is not empty even when no humans are present. The central beings remain. The animal carvings remain. The circle holds its intention like a bowl holds water. That might be why the place feels alive even in silence. Not because of ghosts, but because of design. Because humans built a space meant to be felt. You take one last look at the faceless figures and then begin to move again. The walkway guiding you onward. The pillars stay behind, but the sensation of being seen follows you like a quiet echo, and you carry it forward into the next stretch of night. You leave the central pillars behind you, but they keep walking in your head. Two tall silhouettes pacing alongside your thoughts. The path bends, the angle shifts, and suddenly the enclosures feel less like solemn geometry and more like the aftermath of a party that ended 12,000 years ago and never quite got cleaned up. Not in a messy way, more in an energetic way. like the stones still remember noise. Your stomach makes a tiny, rude suggestion again, and you almost laugh, because yes, as soon as you think gathering place, your body goes. So, food, you are predictable. Humans have always been predictable, and Göbeklitepe, in its quiet, ancient way, seems to nod and say, correct, now you are paying attention. Here is the mainstream fact that anchors this section. Evidence from Göbeklitepe and nearby early Neolithic sites suggests large communal gatherings involved feasting, and there are arguments that such events could have required organized food production or intensified resource management. At Göbeklitepe specifically, archaeologists have discussed large amounts of animal bones and the scale of activity as consistent with big gatherings. The hill does not just whisper ritual, it also whispers logistics. You slow your pace until you are almost standing still, and you let yourself drift into a night feast scene, soft and non-violent, like a dream where everything tastes good, but nobody has to do the dishes. Fires burn in shallow pits, and the glow paints people's faces warm and alive. Smoke curls upward and clings to hair and hides and skin. The smell is thick with roasted meat, and you can hear fat sizzling, that comforting sound that makes your brain relax because it means calories are becoming available. Somewhere someone laughs, and the laugh is answered by another, and suddenly the circle feels less like a shrine and more like a community breathing in unison. You imagine hunted animals brought in, gazelle, wild boar, maybe onager, maybe birds. People cut, roast, share. Hands pass pieces from one person to another. Even if you have never been in a prehistoric feast, you know the social mechanics. The moment food is shared, bonds are reinforced, debts are created, alliances are softened, grudges are negotiated. A feast is never just a meal. It is a social tool with grease on its fingers. Historians still argue whether the need to support these large feasts pushed people toward cultivating wild cereals, effectively nudging the development of agriculture. The idea is not that someone suddenly invents farming because they wake up inspired. It is that their social life demands reliability. If you host seasonal gatherings, you need predictable surplus. And predictable surplus is the gateway drug to planting. The hill, in this theory, becomes a kind of engine. Ritual creating repetition, repetition creating planning, planning creating cultivation. The first temple, if you want to call it that, might also be the first pressure cooker. You take a slow breath and let your eyes rest on the stone again. The night makes the roof structure above feel like a modern cloud, but beneath it, the ancient circles hold the imagined feast like a scent trapped in fabric. You can almost hear the clack of stone tools against bone. You can almost feel warmth on your face from a fire you cannot see. Now your mind slides toward another beloved detail, one that is both scholarly and a little mischievous, the possibility of early beer. Yes, beer. Humans do not wait long to figure out fermentation, because humans are excellent at discovering ways to make life slightly more tolerable. There is a quirky tidbit often mentioned in discussions of early Neolithic feasting. At sites in this broader region and time frame, there are hints that people may have processed wild grains for fermented beverages, and some scholars have suggested beer could have been part of ritual gatherings, because it helps with bonding, celebration, and that ancient tradition of someone getting too emotional and telling everyone they love them. Whether Göbeklitepe itself had beer is debated, but the idea fits the social logic like a stone fits a socket. You smile to yourself because the thought of people in 9500 BCE having a ceremonial brew makes them feel suddenly close. You picture someone leaning in, whispering, "Try this," and handing you a bowl. You take a sip. It is sour, cloudy, maybe a little gritty, but it has warmth. Your cheeks flush, your shoulders loosen, you laugh more easily. You start thinking the carved fox on the pillar is a really good listener. And then you realize this is exactly why alcohol becomes a ritual tool in so many societies. It changes the temperature of the room, even when the room is outside. Your first light joke of this section slips in. Somewhere in the deep past, someone absolutely drank too much wild grain brew and tried to explain the meaning of the snake carvings like they were a visionary prophet. And everyone else nodded politely, because that is what you do when your friend is on their third bowl. Some behaviors are immortal. You keep walking, and you notice how the physical layout of the enclosures would shape gatherings. The circles create boundaries. They focus attention. They control movement. If you want to stage a ceremony, you need architecture that can hold an audience. You need a place that says, "Here is the center." Göbeklitepe provides that. And because it provides that, it suggests intentional performance. Not necessarily theater in a modern sense, but ritual as an event. A thing you do with an audience. A thing that needs choreography. Historians still argue whether the builders were motivated more by spiritual belief or by social strategy. Some lean toward the idea of religious specialists or ritual leaders, people who understand the stories and control the ceremonies. Others emphasize communal participation, with rituals emerging organically from group needs. The night lets both possibilities coexist. You can imagine a charismatic storyteller standing near the central pillars, voice rising and falling, guiding the crowd through myths. You can also imagine the ritual being more like a shared tradition, with everyone knowing their part, like a seasonal dance. Your mind drifts to the labor again, because feasts and monuments feed each other. People come to feast, and the feast encourages cooperation. And cooperation enables building, and building creates a reason to come again. It is a loop, a social engine. And if you accept that, then agriculture begins to look less like a purely economic invention and more like a cultural adaptation. Not we farm because we are hungry, but we farm because we have commitments, because we have gatherings to host, because we have rituals to maintain, because we have people to impress. You pause at another viewpoint and look down at the stones with new eyes. They are not just sacred. They are infrastructural. They are the hardware of community. They make a promise. If you return, this place will still be here, in a world of constant movement. That promise is powerful. Your second joke arrives softly. If you have ever planned a dinner party and realized you need 3 extra chairs and somehow that leads to buying a whole new table, congratulations. You understand the Göbeklitepe problem. You host one ritual gathering. Then suddenly you are quarrying limestone and inventing civilization. It escalates fast. You let your eyelids dip again. The imagined feast fades in and out like a candle flame. The smell of roasted meat becomes a memory, then a dream, then a suggestion. Your breathing slows. You feel a gentle heaviness behind your eyes. The night is doing its work, but before you drift too far, the debate returns, because it is the spine of this whole story. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe proves that religion came before agriculture in a causal way, or whether both emerged together in a complex web. The truth might be messier than any clean narrative. People might have been experimenting with managing plants while also building monuments. They might have been half settled, half mobile. They might have been doing what humans always do, trying things, keeping what works, telling stories about why it matters. You take a slow breath and imagine the feast ending. The fires burn lower. People lie back on the ground, full and warm, looking up at the stars. Someone hums. Someone snores. The pillars stand silently. animals carved into their sides watching the scene. And in that quiet, you feel the soft, profound possibility that what you call religion and what you call society are not separate inventions. They are braided together. Food and meaning, bread and belief, beer and bonding. You turn your head toward the walkway ahead, ready to move on. And the night seems to follow you with the lingering warmth of an ancient fire, the kind that makes you sleepy not because you are bored, but because you feel safe inside the circle of human togetherness. You keep walking, and the imagined feast warmth fades behind you like a campfire you left too early. The night air is cooler again, and it nudges you back into the practical side of wonder. Because once your brain stops daydreaming about ancient snacks and questionable beer, it immediately asks the next annoying question, okay, but who actually built this? Not in a mythic sense, in a painfully real sense. Who quarries limestone without metal tools? Who decides to carve a fox into a pillar instead of, taking a nap? Who organizes enough people to drag a monolith into place and then stands back and says, yes, perfect. Rotate it 2 degrees to the left. That level of confidence is either leadership or madness. And honestly, it can be both. Here is your mainstream fact for this stretch. The builders of Göbeklitepe worked with local limestone, shaping and carving large T-shaped pillars using stone tools. And the site's construction implies substantial labor coordination for its time, even if you do not memorize any dates or names. That basic reality is astonishing. Stone tools, big stones, big plans. You stop at a quiet vantage point where you can see the enclosure layout again. The circles look calm now, but your mind fills them with motion. You imagine quarrying first. The limestone ridge nearby provides raw material. People pick out a section of bedrock. They chip away, slow and steady, using flint tools, pounding stones, whatever works. It is dusty work. Your mouth would be full of chalk grit. Your hands would ache, your shoulders would burn, and yet, day after day, the shape begins to emerge. A tall slab, then a refined T, then smoothing, then carving, then more smoothing. It is craftsmanship, not brute force alone. You imagine the sound. Stone striking stone, sharp and repetitive. It would be the soundtrack of commitment. You can almost hear it under the night insects, like a ghost rhythm. Now, you picture transport. How do you move a multi-ton pillar without wheels, without draft animals, without cranes? The answer is probably the oldest answer. You use people, ropes, levers, wooden rollers, sleds. You take advantage of slopes. You sweat, you shout, you coordinate. You take breaks. Someone complains. Someone pretends they are not complaining. Someone makes a joke at the worst possible time, and everyone laughs anyway, because laughter is the only thing that keeps you from turning into a pile of resentment halfway up a hill. That joke, by the way, is almost certainly about someone's terrible dragging technique. Humans are consistent. Historians still argue whether this coordination implies a formal leadership structure, like chiefs or ritual specialists directing labor, or whether it could have been organized more organically through communal obligations and shared belief. The difference matters, because if there were leaders, then Göbeklitepe hints at early hierarchy. If there were no leaders, then it hints at the raw power of collective purpose. Either way, it proves something about humans. You can get a lot done when everyone agrees that the goal matters. Even if the goal is basically, let's build a giant stone circle because the vibes demand it. You keep walking, and your thoughts shift from who to how. Because building is not just muscle, it is planning. You have to decide dimensions. You have to decide where the pillars go. You have to dig sockets. You have to stabilize them. You have to align them to the circle. The site's enclosures are not random piles. They are designed spaces with a sense of symmetry and intent. That implies mental maps, shared understanding, a blueprint, even if it is only in someone's head and in the gestures they make with their hands while everyone else squints and tries to imagine what they mean. You imagine a builder, maybe an elder, maybe a specialist, standing on the hill and drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. Here, they say, the center, then the ring. The tall ones face each other, and someone else asks, why? And the builder says something that makes the group nod. Because they trust them, or because the story is convincing, or because arguing is exhausting. You smile, because you know that dynamic. You have been in group projects. You have seen how one confident person can steer the whole ship, even if the ship is made of humans and limestone. Now the quirky tidbit creeps in, the one that makes you tilt your head. There is evidence that the site was built and modified over time, with different enclosures possibly representing different phases and perhaps different communities or purposes. In other words, Göbeklitepe might not be a single grand project done in one burst. It might be a long-term endeavor, with people returning season after season, generation after generation, adding, adjusting, creating new circles, filling old ones. That makes the who question even more interesting. It is not one team. It is many. A relay race of stone. You take a slow breath and let your eyes soften. Sleepiness makes the idea of generations feel like a warm blur, like watching a candle flame flicker and realizing it has been passed from wick to wick across time. You imagine a child watching adults carve stone, learning by observing, then later doing it themselves. You imagine a teenager hauling rubble and complaining, then later becoming the one who organizes the hauling. You imagine the old ones sitting near the edge, telling stories about how the first enclosure was built back when I was young, which is the ancient version of kids these days. Some things are timeless. Your first joke of this section slides in quietly. The first known monumental builders probably did not have motivational posters. But you can absolutely imagine someone carving a fox and thinking, live, laugh, quarry. You grin, because the absurdity is soothing. You walk on, and the night pushes you toward another thought. If this took so much work, what did people get out of it? They did not get shelter, not directly. They did not get food, not directly. They got something social, something spiritual, something psychological. They got cohesion. They got identity. They got a place that made their scattered lives feel anchored. Historians still argue whether the site's primary function was religious worship in a recognizable sense, or whether it served as a broader social nexus where groups negotiated relationships, exchanged goods, and reinforced shared myths. At night, the line between those functions feels thin. Ritual can be negotiation. Negotiation can be ritual. The act of gathering can be sacred simply because it is rare. You pause and look down at the stones again, and you picture the invisible workforce. Not famous individuals, not named architects, just people. Hands, backs, feet. And you think about the humility of that. This site is monumental, but its builders are mostly anonymous to us. Their names are lost. Their voices are lost. We have their work and the echo of their intention. Your second joke arrives. Gentle. Imagine doing all that labor and then having modern humans show up and say, "Wow, who do you think built this?" Aliens. The ancient builders would be so offended. They would be like, "Excuse me, that was my back. That was my shoulder. That was my whole summer." You chuckle softly, then immediately feel the urge to apologize to the stones, as if they care. Your gaze drifts to the edges of the excavation again. The unexcavated mound looms like a closed book. There could be more enclosures down there, more pillars, more carvings, more evidence of how building evolved. Each new layer could change our picture of organization. Maybe some circles are more refined. Maybe some are rougher. Maybe some were built quickly, others carefully. The site might hold a timeline of experimentation, a record of humans learning how to do monumentality. You breathe in slowly. The air is cool. The night is quiet. You feel your eyes getting heavier, but your mind is still gently curious, not racing. That is the sweet spot. You let your thoughts settle on a simple image. People in the dark, holding torches, pulling ropes, guiding a massive pillar into a socket. The moment it finally stands upright, there is a pause, silence, then a surge of sound, shouts, cheers, maybe tears, maybe laughter, the kind of release you feel when a hard thing is finally done. And then, perhaps, someone steps back and looks at it, and they feel what you feel now, not just accomplishment, but awe, a sense that they have changed the landscape, not for survival, but for meaning. They have made a place that will outlast them. You turn and follow the walkway onward, carrying the invisible builders with you like quiet companions. Their sweat and jokes and stubbornness woven into the stones beneath your feet. You keep moving, and the hill starts to feel like it is lifting your chin on purpose, nudging your gaze upward. Because at night, you cannot stare at Göbeklitepe for long without eventually looking past it. Above it, into the sky that hangs like a vast black curtain sprinkled with cold glitter. The stars are sharp tonight. Not city stars. Real stars. The kind that make you realize your phone screen is basically a sad little nightlight compared to the universe. You stop at a spot where the roof structure frames the sky in a clean rectangle. And for a second, it feels like you are looking at a cosmic painting hung above ancient stone. The stones below, the stars above. Your mind immediately wants to connect them, because your mind is a compulsive matchmaker. You two would be perfect together, your brain whispers. And then it starts arranging theories like furniture. Here is the mainstream fact that steadies you. Göbeklitepe was built in a time when people lived intimately with the night sky, using it for orientation, seasonal timing, and storytelling. And while some researchers explore possible astronomical aspects of the site, definitive alignments and meanings remain debated. In other words, the sky mattered. But exactly how it mattered here is not a settled answer. You tilt your head and let your eyes trace the stars. You cannot name many constellations, because modern life does not require that skill anymore. You can name maybe one or two if you concentrate, and even then, you're not fully confident, like someone guessing at a quiz they did not study for. Still, you feel the ancient pull of pattern recognition. 3 bright points in a line, a cluster like scattered salt, a curve that could be a bow or a hook. You realize that if you had no books, no screens, no written calendars, the sky would become your library. The stars would become stories, and stories, in turn, would become tools. Historians still argue whether the builders of Göbeklitepe intentionally oriented specific enclosures or pillars toward particular celestial events, like solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of certain stars. Some suggest that the placement of the central pillars, or the entrances to enclosures, might reflect a deliberate relationship with the heavens. Others caution that with enough stones and enough stars, humans can find alignments by accident. The debate is the classic tug-of-war between pattern and proof. Now the fringe claims, the cosmic coin coincidences, start shimmering at the edges of your sleepy mind. This is where people get excited and slightly unhinged in the most entertaining way. Some argue the animal carvings encode constellations. Fox equals this cluster, scorpion equals that, bird equals another. Others go further and claim the site is a record of a catastrophic celestial event, like a comet impact, with the carvings as a coded warning. You can almost hear late-night documentary music swelling right now, that dramatic "something is about to be revealed" sound that makes you sit up even if you're in pajamas. You smile, because you know the feeling. It is tempting. The night sky is seductive. It makes every ancient monument feel like a telescope. But you keep your mental feet planted. You remind yourself that humans are perfectly capable of carving animals because animals matter, without needing them to be star maps. Still, the possibility of sky symbolism does not vanish just because the wildest versions of it are shaky. It can be both. Animals can be animals and also mythic markers. A fox can be a fox and also a story about the season when foxes appear, which might coincide with a star's return, which might be useful. Symbolism is allowed to have layers. You take a slow breath, and the air feels colder as you look up. A faint breeze moves across the exposed parts of your face. You feel the tiny hairs on your arms lift, and for a moment, you imagine the site as it might have been at night, fully open to the sky, without a modern roof. The enclosures would have been bowls, holding firelight inside while the stars hovered above. The central pillars would have been silhouettes against constellations, and that alone could make them feel like cosmic beings, not aliens. Just the human tendency to frame meaning in the biggest thing you can see. Your quirky tidbit for this section slips in gently. There are theories that early Neolithic communities may have tracked seasonal changes using celestial cues. And even if Göbeklitepe was not an observatory, its monumental spaces could have amplified sky watching as part of ritual timing. Imagine a gathering that happens when a particular star first appears at dawn after months away. That star becomes a signal. It is time to travel, time to feast, time to renew alliances, time to tell the story again. That is not fringe, that is practical mythology. Historians still argue whether ritual calendars came first and then agriculture followed, or whether early cultivation demanded better calendars, pulling people toward sky observation. Either way, the sky becomes woven into survival. The stars are not just pretty, they are scheduling. You let your gaze drift back down to the stones. The contrast is almost too much. Above you, infinite distance. Below you, heavy limestone carved with foxes and snakes. And yet, both are part of the same human impulse. To map your world, to make sense of chaos, to locate yourself in a universe that does not explain itself. Your first joke of this section arrives softly. Imagine being the ancient sky watcher whose entire job is to say, "Not yet, not yet. Okay, now." And everyone groans because it means they have to start hauling stones again. The stars rise, and so does your workload. Cosmic management is ruthless. You keep standing there, letting your eyes blur slightly. Sleepiness makes the stars look like they are pulsing. But you know it is just your eyelids flirting with closure. You let them half close, then open again, just enough to keep the scene alive. The night sky is a lullaby with lights. Lullaby with your mind wanders to the idea of cosmic coincidence, even if there is no deliberate alignment. The simple fact is that the sky overhead is the same sky those builders saw. The stars have shifted slightly over millennia, yes, but the experience of looking up is shared. That is a mainstream truth you do not need a citation for. You feel it. You and someone from 9500 BCE both tilt your head back and get humbled. That humility, might be part of why a place like this exists at all. If you live under a sky that big, you might want to build something that answers it. Something tall, something enduring, something that says, "We are here." Not in an arrogant way, in a pleading way, in a hopeful way. Like a child leaving a stone on a windowsill so the night does not feel so empty. Historians still argue whether the monumental scale of Göbeklitepe reflects a rising sense of shared identity among dispersed groups. Perhaps in response to environmental changes or social pressures, the sky could be part of that identity. A shared canopy over everyone. A shared storybook. When you gather under it, you remember you are part of something larger than your own hunt, your own camp, your own small circle of firelight. Your second joke slips in. Modern humans look at the stars and think, "Wow, I should start journaling." While ancient humans look at the stars and think, "Wow, I should carve a 10-ton pillar." Same vibe, different commitment level. You breathe out slowly. Your shoulders drop. You let the sky and stones share the same space in your mind without forcing them into a single, neat explanation. You do not need Göbeklitepe to be an observatory to let the night sky matter here. The sky matters automatically. It always has. It is the largest stage for human imagination. You lower your gaze again, returning to the enclosures, and you feel the sight's quiet magnetism pull you back down. The stars keep shining above, indifferent but constant, while the carved animals and faceless pillars hold their own kind of constellations below. Two maps, two ways of reading the world. And you, sleepy and small, stand between them like a bookmark. You take one slow step forward, letting the night guide you onward, ready to follow the next thread the hill offers, whether it leads into the ground, into memory, or deeper into that soft place between fact and dream. You lower your gaze from the stars, and the sight feels heavier again, like gravity is gently reclaiming your attention. The sky is soothing in its distance, but the earth under your feet carries a different kind of story. A closer one, a story that smells like soil and stone and old breath. You keep walking, and the walkway leads you toward the human traces, the parts of Göbeklitepe that whisper, quietly, that this was not only about animals and monuments, it was also about people, about bodies, about memory. The night air is still, and in that stillness your own breathing sounds louder. Like you are walking through a library and forgetting to whisper. You slow down instinctively, as if the hill might be disturbed by noise. And then your mind brings up the phrase that sits like a pebble in the shoe of every conversation about early ritual sites. Skulls. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. At Göbeklitepe and related early Neolithic contexts in the region, archaeologists have found evidence of practices involving human skulls and careful treatment of human remains, suggesting ancestor-related rituals or symbolic uses of the human head. The details vary by site, and interpretations are debated. But the broader theme is real. People were doing things with the dead that went beyond simple disposal. You let that fact settle gently. Because this is a bedtime walk and we are not here for horror. We are here for that calm, eerie edge where the past becomes intimate. You imagine a community where ancestors are not gone. They are present, not as ghosts, but as social forces. Their stories guide decisions. Their names carry weight. Their bones may even be kept, displayed, honored, moved. In a world without written records, the dead can become your living archive. You stop near the edge of an enclosure and rest your hands on the railing again. The metal is cool. Your palms are warm. That contrast is comforting, like holding a cold glass when you're overheated. You look down at the stones and imagine that beneath all the carved foxes and snakes, there are moments of human ritual that do not leave obvious marks. A whispered name, a bowl placed on the ground, a hand pressed to stone, a moment of silence held by many people at once. Historians still argue whether the skull-related evidence points to veneration of ancestors, displays of enemies, ritual identity marking, or complex mortuary practices that shift over time. The scholarly debate is partly about meaning and partly about caution, because it is easy for modern minds to label anything involving skulls as macabre, when for ancient minds it might have been normal, even comforting. A skull could be a reminder that you belong, a reminder that your people extend backward in time like roots. Your imagination drifts into a scene that feels both strange and strangely gentle. You picture a gathering at night, firelight flickering against stone. Someone carries something wrapped carefully in hide or woven fiber. They unwrap it, slowly, respectfully. A skull, cleaned, perhaps decorated, perhaps marked. The group watches in silence. Not fear, not shock. Recognition. The skull is not a prop. It is a person's trace, a physical anchor for memory. Someone speaks the ancestor's name. Someone recounts a story. The community listens. The circle of stone holds the words like a bowl holds water. That image might feel unsettling to you, because your modern world keeps the dead at a distance, but the early Neolithic world may have been more porous. Death was close. Survival was uncertain. The boundary between life and death was not hidden behind hospital walls and polite euphemisms. And so, rituals that involved the dead could be a way of managing that closeness, turning fear into structure, grief into tradition. Now the quirky tidbit slides in, the one that makes Göbeklitepe feel like it is leaning toward you to whisper a secret. There are hints in the archaeology of the region that some skulls were modified or marked, possibly for display or ritual use. And at Göbeklitepe, there has been discussion of carved grooves and handling that suggest intentional treatment rather than random disturbance. The specifics are debated, but the idea that skulls were curated is hard to ignore. Curated, like objects in a collection. Except the collection is your family line, your community's past, your proof that you are not alone in time. You blink slowly, and sleepiness makes the scene less sharp, more dreamlike. The skull becomes less an object and more a symbol, a white moon in someone's hands. You take a slow breath and let the night soften it. Your first light joke of this section arrives carefully. Because you do not want to be disrespectful, modern people keep pictures of their grandparents on shelves, and ancient people might have been like, "Photos are cute, but have you tried a whole skull?" It is dark humor, yes, but it also underlines something real. We all keep the dead close in the ways our cultures allow. You keep walking, and the idea of masks drifts in too. Not literal masks you can point to here with certainty, but the universal human habit of using faces as symbols. Faces define identity. Faces separate us from them. A carved face, a mask, a skull, a faceless pillar shaped like a person. All of it circles the same theme. Who are you, and who are your people? Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's human-like pillars and skull-related traces belong to a coherent cult of ancestors, a broader symbolic system, or multiple traditions overlapping. The site likely saw repeated use over long periods, and practices could shift. One generation's sacred act can become another generation's background tradition. And that means the hill could contain layers of ritual logic, some consistent, some changing, like songs evolving as they are sung. You pause again and look out beyond the site. The distant modern lights are still there, quiet and trembling. You think about how those lights represent living people with their own rituals, their own ways of remembering the dead. In some homes, there are altars. In others, there are photo frames. In others, there are digital memorial pages. We have not stopped doing ancestor work. We have just changed the tools. And maybe that is the point. Göbeklitepe feels alien because it is old, but it also feels familiar because the emotional machinery is the same. You want continuity. You want meaning. You want to believe the people you love do not vanish entirely when they die. Even if you are not religious, the desire for remembrance is almost biological. It is part of being social. Your second joke slips in softly. If the ancestors are watching, they have definitely seen you panic over a single unread email, and they're either laughing or deeply concerned. Probably both. You let your eyes drift back to the stones. The carvings of animals feel less like random beasts now, and more like companions in ritual. The faceless central pillars feel less like architecture and more like presences. And the skull theme ties it together. A community making the invisible visible, making memory tangible, giving identity a physical anchor. You take a slow breath and imagine the hill at night in its active years. A ceremony ends. People step out of the enclosure quietly. Someone touches the stone as they pass. A habitual gesture like touching a doorway for luck. The fire burns low. The stars overhead remain indifferent. And somewhere, perhaps, an ancestor's skull is wrapped again and carried away, not as a trophy, not as a horror, but as a cherished link in a chain. You feel your eyelids droop again, the way they do when your mind has been fed enough wonder. The hill is not trying to scare you. It is trying to remind you that humans have always been complicated, tender and pragmatic, reverent and ridiculous, capable of building temples and also of being emotionally attached to bones. You keep walking, letting that thought settle into you like a warm stone placed gently on your chest, steadying your breath as the night guides you onward toward the next enclosure, the next silence, the next question waiting under the roof and the stars. You keep walking, and the idea of ancestors fades into the background like a song you can still hum but no longer hear clearly. The walkway carries you from one circle's mood to another, and you start noticing something the brochures never quite capture. The silence here is not one single silence. It has textures, pockets, different weights. In one spot, the air feels open and forgiving. In another, it feels tight, like the stones are holding their breath. You approach the next enclosure, and even under low light you can sense the shift in design. The pillars are arranged differently. The spacing changes. The circle feels like it has its own personality. Like each enclosure is a separate room in a house, built for spirits and social drama. You lean on the railing and let your eyes sweep across the shape, taking in how the curve pulls you inward. Your body responds before your brain does. Your shoulders soften, your jaw unclenches. Then, a second later, your brain tries to explain why. Here is your mainstream fact for this stretch of night. Göbeklitepe contains multiple circular and oval enclosures built in different phases, and their layouts and carving programs vary, suggesting the site developed over time rather than being a single frozen moment. You feel that development now. It is not just a temple. It is a sequence of decisions, a long conversation in stone. You stand quietly and let the differences speak. One circle feels formal, almost stern, with pillars that seem to watch. Another feels more crowded, more intimate, as if it expects bodies to press closer together. Another looks like it has been altered, tightened, expanded, adjusted. The more you stare, the more you realize this place is not a snapshot. It is an evolving rhythm. You start imagining the site like a living schedule. One enclosure used for one kind of rite, another for another. Or one enclosure old and revered, another newer and experimental. Your breath slows, your eyelids dip and lift. You are not trying to solve it. You are letting it settle into you. Historians still argue whether each enclosure served a distinct function, hosted different groups, or represented changing ritual traditions across generations. That debate feels especially alive here, because variation is the clue that nothing stays the same for long. Even in sacred spaces, people change, needs change, stories change, the stones stay. But the reasons for arranging them might have shifted with each new set of hands. You imagine the site in its active years, not as a single grand gathering, but as a series of nights like this, repeated across seasons. Sometimes the hill is busy, fires everywhere, voices bouncing off stone. Sometimes it is quiet, a smaller group, a tighter circle, a more private ceremony. You picture one enclosure filled with laughter and feasting, another filled with hushed chanting, another used for teaching, where elders point at carvings and tell stories while younger listeners nod, wide-eyed. Trying to memorize a myth the way you try to memorize a password, you will definitely forget in 10 minutes. Your first light joke slips in as you consider those different moods. Even 12,000 years ago, some circles were absolutely the loud table, and some were the please do not chew loudly in here section. Sacred etiquette has always existed. Someone was always shushing someone else. You shift your stance and look for patterns. In the dim light, your eyes are drawn to the empty spaces between pillars, the gaps that form invisible doorways. You imagine how people would move, entering, circling, stopping at certain points. Architecture is choreography, even if no one wrote it down. The space tells your body where to go. You can feel it now, standing above it. If you stepped into the circle, you would naturally orbit the center. You would glance toward the tallest pillars. You would lower your voice. You would become part of the design. That realization brings a quiet thrill, because it means the builders were not only moving stone, they were shaping behavior. A small breeze passes through, and the modern roof above you answers with a faint creak. The sound is so soft it feels like the place clearing its throat. You smile, because it is the closest thing to a response you're going to get. You listen anyway. You always listen anyway. The walkway carries you along to another viewpoint, and you notice something else. Some areas feel more finished than others. Some carvings look crisp. Others feel simpler or less detailed, as if time ran out or taste changed. That leads your mind toward a quirky tidbit that floats around Göbeklitepe like an insistent moth. The idea that these enclosures might be ritual layers, built, used, and then intentionally buried as part of a cycle, almost like seasons of sacred architecture. It is not a proven ritual script, but the deliberate backfilling makes it tempting to imagine a pattern of closure and renewal. Build a circle. Use it. Retire it. Bury it. Build another. Sacred space is something you can complete, like finishing a story and then putting it away. Historians still argue whether the intentional burial was a respectful sealing, a practical stabilizing move, a response to social change, or a combination that refuses to fit into a single motive. And you, standing here in the dark, can feel how all those motives could coexist. Humans rarely do one thing for one reason. You can bury a something because it is sacred, and because it is inconvenient, and because you are starting a new chapter. Those reasons can sit in the same basket without fighting. You let your eyes wander beyond the excavated areas to the unexcavated mound. It sits like a smooth shoulder of earth, quiet and opaque. You think about how much is still hidden, and your imagination wants to dig with its mind. You picture more circles down there, more pillars, more carving styles, more evidence of shifts over time. The site becomes a layered cake of human intention, except the frosting is soil and the sprinkles are limestone chips. Delicious. Archaeology is so appetizing when you say it wrong. Your second joke arrives as you consider all that buried potential. Somewhere under that mound is probably the ancient equivalent of a draft version. An enclosure where someone tried a carving idea and the group politely agreed to bury it and never speak of it again. Even sacred builders had to deal with someone's creative phase. It happens. You take a slow breath and the air tastes faintly of dust. Your body is calmer now. The night is doing that gentle thing where it smooths your thoughts into a slow stream. You are still curious, but not sharp. It is like your mind is wrapped in a soft blanket and can only move at a comfortable pace. You focus again on the enclosure in front of you. The stones look pale, almost luminous in the low light. You think about the people who stood here and how they might have felt moving between different circles. Did they notice the mood changes the way you do? Did one enclosure feel heavier, another lighter? Did they have names for them? Did they say, "Tonight we go to that one"? With the same certainty you say, "We always meet at that restaurant," because habit becomes law in the human heart. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe functioned as a single, cohesive ritual complex or as a constellation of spaces used by different groups and traditions over time. That word, constellation, feels right tonight, especially after your sky gazing. The enclosures are like stars you can walk between. Each one holds a different story. Together, they form a picture you can sense but not fully outline. You blink slowly and let your eyes soften. The stones blur at the edges, and in that blur you can almost see movement, not ghosts, just imagined bodies, people shifting in firelight, shadows sliding along carvings. The hush between chants, the pause between drumbeat, the quiet after laughter fades, the silence between circles. Your third joke comes gently as you feel that hush. You know you are getting sleepy when you start treating an archaeological site like it has vibes in different rooms. But also, yes, it absolutely does. Your brain is basically doing interior design for prehistory. This enclosure feels cozy. That one feels intense. This one needs more lighting. Sleep makes you honest. You straighten slowly and take one more look across the enclosure, letting the differences settle into a single impression. This place is not one message. It is many. It is a long-lived gathering point that kept changing as humans changed, and that, weirdly, makes it feel more real. A single perfect monument can feel like a myth. An evolving complex feels like life. You step forward again, following the walkway into the next curve of night, and you carry the silence with you, not as emptiness, but as space. Space where stories can echo. Space where meanings can shift. Space where you can drift closer to sleep without losing the thread of wonder. You follow the curve of the walkway, and the enclosures begin to feel like thoughts you can circle without ever fully owning. The night has softened your edges. Your breath is slow, your body is warm enough. But the hill keeps one sharp question tucked behind its teeth, and sooner or later it bites gently. Why was it buried? Because this is not the usual story where time simply collapses a place and sand kindly tucks it in. This is a story where hands did the tucking, where people who knew every stone still chose to hide the stones. And the more you think about that, the more it feels like watching someone close a book on the last page, press a palm to the cover, and whisper, "Done." You stop at a vantage point where you can see the enclosure floor level and the cut edges of excavation. Even in low light, you sense layers. You do not need bright sunshine to feel the thickness of time. It is in the way the earth sits, compacted and stubborn, like it has been holding its breath for millennia. Here is your mainstream fact for this part of the walk. Many of Göbeklitepe's enclosures were intentionally backfilled in antiquity with large amounts of material, which helped preserve the pillars and reliefs, and this burial appears deliberate rather than accidental. That fact is as solid as the limestone. The why is the slippery part. You imagine the day it happens, except it might not be a single day. It might be many days. It might be a season. It might be a long, quiet decision carried out step by step. You picture people arriving at the circle with baskets and armloads of rubble. Not gentle soil at first, but chunky stones, broken fragments, debris from work. They toss it in. It clatters against the bases of pillars. Dust rises. Someone coughs. Someone wipes their face with the back of their hand and leaves a pale streak across their cheek like war paint. Except the war is against gravity and time. The first loads feel symbolic, like the beginning of a ritual. But as the fill rises, it becomes labor again. Heavy, repetitive, unromantic, the kind of work that makes your back hate you. You can almost feel the ache just thinking about it, and your own spine, very modern and very dramatic, responds with a little protestive twinge. You whisper, "I support you emotionally," to your back, which does nothing. The ancient builders would be unimpressed. They would be like, "Have you tried not being fragile?" Very rude, very prehistoric. Historians still argue whether the burial was a ritual closure, a practical act to stabilize or repurpose the area, a response to changing social structures, or some combination that refuses a single, neat motive. And the night makes every option feel plausible, because humans bury things for many reasons. You bury treasure, you bury the dead, you bury memories, you bury mistakes, you bury sacred objects so they are not misused. You bury things you cannot carry forward into the next version of your life. You watch the imagined fill rise. The carvings disappear first at the base. Then the lower reliefs are swallowed. Then the smaller pillars become stumps. The central pillars keep standing like stubborn thoughts you cannot suppress, until even they are encased up to their waists, then their chests, then their shoulders. Finally, the top crossbars vanish, and the circle becomes a smooth, quiet hill again. That image is strangely tender. It is not destruction. It is sealing, like tucking in a child and turning off the light. Except the child is a monumental sanctuary, and the bedtime is 12,000 years long. Your mind offers a gentle joke. The first of this section, this is the most extreme version of clean up after the party, ever. Most people stack chairs. These people stack geology. You smile softly, because humor keeps the mystery from feeling too heavy. You keep walking and let the debate roll around in your head. If the enclosures were abandoned because the community changed, maybe farming began to take more attention, and people had less time for massive ritual gatherings. Maybe new settlements formed, and the old hill lost its pull. Maybe younger generations found different symbols, or maybe the hill remained sacred. But sacredness demanded closure, like ending a ceremony properly so it does not linger in the air. You look at the mound beyond the excavated areas, and it feels like a giant hand pressed down over the past. The fact that the enclosures were buried helps explain why they survived in such condition, but it also hints at an emotional relationship with the site. People do not usually preserve things by accident. They preserve what matters, even if they preserve it by hiding it. A quirky tidbit drifts in here, the kind that makes the burial feel even more deliberate. The backfill is not just clean soil. It includes a mix of rubble, stone fragments and cultural debris, suggesting it was an active filling process tied to human activity, not a slow, natural drift. That mixture makes you picture a closing event where materials from daily life and building work are swept in, as if the circle is being fed one last time. The enclosure becomes a container for its own leftovers, like a ritual compost heap that turns use into preservation. Historians still argue whether that debris reflects a final feast and cleanup, a structured deposition with symbolic meaning, or simply the most efficient way to fill a large space. Efficiency and symbolism can overlap. You know that. You have done things that are practical and emotionally loaded at the same time, like keeping an old hoodie because it is warm and because it smells like someone you miss. You pause and rest your hands on the railing again. The cool metal steadies you. You breathe in slowly, and your breath feels like a small thing in a very old place. You think about how burying a sacred site could be a form of respect, a way to protect it from misuse by outsiders, a way to keep its power contained, a way to say, "We are done here, and we do not want the next group to stomp in and treat it like a picnic spot." Then another possibility rises, quieter but sharp. Maybe the burial is a way of controlling memory. If a place holds too much, if it binds people too strongly to old obligations, burying it could be a release, a way to step into a new life. Maybe farming communities begin to form, and they need different gathering spaces closer to fields. Maybe the old rituals no longer fit the new rhythm of planting and harvesting. You can feel how a society on the edge of becoming sedentary might want to close the chapter of wandering, gathering culture properly, with ceremony, with finality. Your second joke slips in. A little sleepy. Imagine being the person tasked with explaining this decision. "So, great work, everyone. Stunning pillars. Gorgeous fox. Now we bury it." And someone in the back goes, "Sorry, what?" And the leader says, "Yes, exactly. Get your baskets." Human confusion is timeless. You walk again, and the mound seems to rise beside you like a sleeping shoulder. The night sky above is still scattered with stars, but your attention is inside the earth now, inside the idea of deliberate forgetting. It makes you think about how we do this today, too, in quieter ways. You archive emails. You delete photos. You box up old clothes. You move houses and leave behind things that once mattered. You create closure rituals without calling them rituals. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's burial marks the end of a particular cultural pattern or one phase within a longer sequence of rebuilding and repurposing, because it might not be a single ending. Some enclosures could be buried while others are still active. The hill could be closing some rooms while opening others. That possibility makes the site feel even more alive, even in its long silence, like a house being renovated across generations, with some rooms sealed off, some repainted, some expanded. Your eyelids grow heavier, and the thought becomes softer. You imagine the final loads of fill going in, the last visible edge of a pillar disappearing. Someone stands at the top of the newly smoothed mound and looks down at it, breathing hard. Maybe they feel relief, maybe grief, maybe pride, maybe all of it tangled together. Your third joke arrives gently as you picture that moment. The ancient person pats the mound twice like, "There, that's not going anywhere." And the mound is like, "Correct. See you in 12,000 years." You let out a tiny breathy laugh, and it blends into the night. You keep walking, carrying the image of burial as a kind of slow goodbye. Not a dramatic ending, not a collapse, but a deliberate act, a choice to hide what you love, or what you fear, or what you cannot carry forward. And that choice makes the hill feel more human than any carving ever could. Because building is one kind of intention, burying is another, Both require agreement. Both require emotion. Both leave traces you can still feel. Standing here, sleepy under a modern roof, listening to the earth hold its secrets with patient hands. You keep moving, and the idea of burial follows you like a quiet aftertaste. Not bitter, not sweet, just present. The walkway curves again, and you find yourself thinking about labels. Because labels are what the modern mind grabs when something feels too big. And Göbeklitepe is one of those places that people love to label with a headline that fits neatly on a thumbnail. The first temple. You can almost hear the phrase said in that dramatic documentary voice. The one that turns every noun into a cliffhanger. The first temple. It sounds final. It sounds proven. It sounds like you can check a box in human history and move on. But the stones, being stones, do not cooperate with tidy marketing. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. Göbeklitepe is among the earliest known monumental complexes with clear ritual or symbolic architecture, dating to around the 10th millennium BCE. But what counts as a temple, and whether it is truly the first, depends on definitions and comparisons with other early sites. That is the key. Definitions, comparisons, the messy part. You stop and let your eyes settle on the circles again. They do not look like a temple in the way you picture temples. There is no obvious altar in the modern sense. No carved gods with names you can read. No written prayers. No walls with a roof you can point to and say, "This is the sanctuary." And yet, the place feels set apart. It feels intentionally special. The monumental pillars are not practical for ordinary daily life. You do not build something like this just to store grain or keep goats from wandering off. It is too much effort for that. It is a statement. So what is a temple? Really, you feel sleep tugging at the edges of your thoughts. But you keep them gently focused, like holding a candle steady in a breeze. A temple could be a place where humans meet the divine. It could be a place for ritual performance. It could be a place of social gathering under sacred rules. It could be a place that is not home, a separate zone where ordinary behavior changes. By those broader definitions, Göbeklitepe fits. But the phrase first temple implies a straight line of evolution. From here to later temples in cities, in states, in empires. And historians still argue whether that line is real or if it is a modern story we tell because we like origin points. You think about other early sites, quietly, without turning this into a lecture. There are places like Neolithic, not far away in the larger region and time span, where T-shaped pillars appear too. There are early settlements like Jericho, where communal structures and walls emerge. There are other Neolithic sites where ritual spaces exist alongside houses. The early Neolithic world is full of experiments. Göbeklitepe is one of the most dramatic, but it may not be alone. Calling it the first temple can be true in a narrow sense, but it can also hide the broader picture, a whole region of humans reinventing what place means. Your first joke of this section slips in gently. Humans love a first so much that if we could, we would label someone's first good soup as the first cuisine. We are obsessive. We want beginnings. The past does not always give us clean ones. You let your gaze wander to the central pillars again, and you notice how the word temple changes your posture. If you tell yourself it is a temple, you immediately imagine priests, rituals, rules. If you tell yourself it is a meeting hall, you imagine negotiation, feasting, alliances. If you tell yourself it is a monument, you imagine memory, identity, pride. The stones are the same, but your story lens changes the whole feeling. That is why definitions matter. They are not neutral. They guide what you think is possible. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe should be categorized as a temple, a sanctuary, a ceremonial center, or a multi-purpose aggregation site where ritual was intertwined with social life. At night, the argument feels less academic and more like a gentle reminder. You are trying to translate a world that did not leave you a dictionary. The builders did not carve labels into the stone saying, "Welcome to the temple, open from dawn until dusk." They built with gestures, symbols, and habits. You're reading the shape of their meaning, not the words. A quirky tidbit drifts in, and it is one that always makes the first temple idea wobble in your hands. Some scholars suggest that what we call religion in the early Neolithic might have been inseparable from social identity and ecology. In that view, Göbeklitepe is not a temple in the later institutional sense. It is a communal ritual machine, a place where groups reaffirm their relationships to animals, ancestors, territory, and each other. The sacred is not separated from daily life. It is braided into it. If that is true, then calling it a temple is not wrong, but it might be like calling a campfire a kitchen. Technically, yes, but it misses the vibe. You breathe in slowly. Your lungs fill with cool air. Your body feels heavier now, pleasantly. The night wants you to drift, and you let it, but you keep one thread of thought. Why does the first temple label matter so much to us? Because it challenges the old story. Because it suggests that humans might have gathered for shared meaning before they gathered to plant fields. Because it implies that ritual and imagination are not luxury items that arrive after survival is secured. They might be engines that drive survival strategies. That is the radical implication, meaning first, or at least meaning alongside hunger. Historians still argue whether agriculture was a prerequisite for monumental ritual, or whether monumental ritual helped catalyze agriculture. And the answer might be both, in different places, in different ways, over centuries. The early Neolithic is not a single switch flipping. It is a long dawn. Göbeklitepe is one bright star in that dawn, not necessarily the first light ever. Your second joke slips in as you consider the dawn metaphor. If human history had a customer support line, the early Neolithic would be the part where everyone is on hold. Pressing 1 for farming, pressing 2 for ritual. And the system keeps saying, "Your request is important to us." While humans just start doing both anyway, you smile. Because it is true. People do not wait for permission. You look down again at the stones and let yourself feel the simple awe without fighting over labels. The pillars stand because people wanted them to stand. The circles exist because people believed a circle mattered. Whether you call it a temple, a sanctuary, a gathering place, or the world's oldest group project, the emotional fact remains. Humans built this to do something together that felt larger than themselves. And then you think about the word first again. The night makes it feel less like a trophy and more like a question. If this is one of the earliest monumental ritual spaces we know, what does that say about earlier ones we do not know? Places made of wood that rotted. Places made of earth that eroded. Fires that left no permanent mark. The first temple, in that sense, might be invisible, lost to time. Göbeklitepe might be the first one that survived in stone because stone is stubborn. Historians still argue about the balance of luck and intention in what survives archaeologically. And you can feel that luck under your feet. If the enclosures had not been buried, the carvings might have weathered away. If they had been built in wood, nothing would remain. The fact that you can stand here tonight is partly because ancient people sealed the site, and partly because limestone can outlast almost everything. Your third joke arrives quietly as you take that in. The earliest temples were probably like, "We are eternal." And time was like, "Cute." And then Göbeklitepe was like, "Actually, I'm going to be buried and preserved." And time was like, "Fine, you win this one." You exhale a tiny laugh through your nose. You straighten, and your eyes soften again. The labels feel less urgent now. You do not need to win the argument. You only need to walk with the question. The phrase, "first temple," can be a doorway, not a destination. It can invite wonder without pretending the past is a straight line. You take a slow step forward and let the walkway carry you onward, deeper into the night, deeper into the place where the hill keeps its meanings layered and gentle. The stones do not demand a title. They only ask you to notice what humans were capable of. Long before anyone wrote it down, you keep walking, and the word temple fades behind you like a label peeled off an old jar. The stones do not need it. The night does not need it. But your modern brain, bless it, loves a dramatic explanation, especially the kind that slides in wearing a cloak and whispering, "What if?" And as you drift deeper into Göbeklitepe's quiet, you can almost hear that whisper approaching from the internet's favorite dark hallway. And Unaki, you smile before you even feel nervous, because you know exactly how this goes. Someone somewhere reads 12,000 years old, sees big stones, sees carvings, and their brain goes, "Yes, clearly, space gods." It is like a reflex. The human mind hates a vacuum of understanding, and if you cannot fill it with evidence, you fill it with something shiny, preferably something that comes with the cinematic soundtrack. Still, you do not dismiss the whisper rudely. You let it sit on the edge of your thoughts like a moth near a candle, because the myth itself, the way it spreads, is part of our modern ritual landscape. You live in a world where ancient sites become symbols not only for archaeologists, but for everyone's private meaning-making machine. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. While Göbeklitepe is often pulled into speculative and fringe narratives, the archaeological evidence supports human construction by early Neolithic communities using stone tools and organized labor, and claims of extraterrestrial builders or Anunnaki involvement are not supported by mainstream scholarship. That is the grounded floor beneath your feet. You can enjoy the whisper without letting it carry you away. You pause and look down at the pillars. They are quiet, patient. Their carvings do not scream alien. They scream human attention. Foxes, snakes, boars, birds, belts, hands. Things that belong to a world of people who live with animals, who touch stone, who gather. The evidence points to humans doing human things, just on a scale that surprises you. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe's builders were fully mobile hunter-gatherers or already in some transitional state toward sedentism, and how exactly the social organization worked. That is the real mystery. Not who from the start, but how did humans coordinate like this so early? The gap between "it is possible" and "it happened" is where the debate lives. And you can feel that debate like a gentle hum under the night air. But the Anunnaki whisper does not stop just because you bring facts into the room. It tries a different angle. It says, the carvings look symbolic. The pillars look like beings. The place feels too advanced. The site was buried. There are skull rituals. There are star theories. Surely this points to something beyond ordinary humans. And here is where you get to practice being both playful and grounded. Because the truth is, ordinary humans are not ordinary. Humans are capable of immense complexity without external help. Symbolic thinking is not a late invention. It is deeply old. Coordination is not a modern invention. Social obligation is ancient. Ritual is an engine that can move bodies the way hunger moves bodies. Your first joke of this section slides in gently. Blaming aliens for Göbeklitepe is like walking into a bakery, seeing a beautiful cake, and insisting squirrels must have baked it because you personally cannot frost that well. Sometimes you just have to accept that other humans can be talented. You keep walking, and the night seems to lean closer, inviting you to separate myth from evidence without crushing the sense of wonder, because wonder is not the enemy of scholarship. It is the doorway. The enemy is certainty dressed as entertainment. The quirky tidbit for this section is about myth itself. The Anunnaki are figures from ancient Mesopotamian mythology, later reinterpreted in modern times through speculative writings that connect them to extraterrestrial narratives. That modern reinterpretation has a life of its own, like a meme with a long beard. It thrives because it offers a clean story. It gives you a single cause for complexity. It replaces messy human development with a tidy intervention. It is comforting, in a weird way, because it means you do not have to sit with uncertainty. Historians still argue whether our modern fascination with ancient aliens reflects a misunderstanding of prehistoric capability, the hunger for mystery, or a deeper psychological need to externalize genius. That debate is not always phrased exactly like that in academic journals. But the tension is real. When you cannot imagine people without writing building monuments, you assume they needed help. But maybe the real lesson is that writing is not required for imagination. Planning, cooperation, or symbolic art. Writing is just one tool for storage and administration. Meaning existed before it. You stop again and rest your hands on the railing, feeling that cool metal. It steadies you. You let your mind wander into the Anunnaki story briefly, like trying on a costume. You picture tall, luminous beings stepping down under the stars, gesturing at humans, teaching them geometry, pointing at the sky, telling them to carve foxes for reasons. It is cinematic. It is fun. It is also, when you look back at the stones, oddly unnecessary, because what you see here is not alien technology. You do not see impossible cuts. You do not see materials that do not belong. You see limestone, carved with patience. You see repetition, variation, experimentation. You see the fingerprints of a human learning curve. The site's enclosures are not identical. They evolve. That is what human projects do. Aliens would probably be more consistent. They would probably have a manual. Humans are the ones who build version 1, bury it, then build version 2 with slightly better vibes. Your second joke arrives. If the Anunnaki were running this project, there would be a checklist, and someone would be fired for burying the whole thing without filing the proper paperwork. This site has chaotic human energy all over it. You exhale slowly, and you feel sleepiness wash through you again. The night makes even your skepticism gentle. You do not need to be harsh. You can simply hold two truths at once. The Anunnaki idea is a modern myth that people enjoy. And Göbeklitepe is a human achievement that does not require extraterrestrial explanation. You look up at the sky again. The stars sparkle like distant nails hammered into darkness. It is easy to understand why ancient people and modern people connect stones to stars. Both are big, both are mysterious, both make you feel small. The Anunnaki whisper is, at its core, a way of coping with that feeling. If beings from the sky built the temple, then the sky is not just indifferent. It is involved, it cares, it intervenes. That is an emotionally satisfying story. But the human story can be just as satisfying, if you let it. The human story says, People looked at the same sky and decided to build something that answered it. People gathered and carved and coordinated. People invented ritual, not because aliens told them to, but because humans need ritual the way humans need warmth. It gives shape to fear. It binds communities. It makes the night feel less endless. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe represents an early flowering of complex symbolic culture or a culmination of traditions already developing elsewhere in the region. Either way, it is human. It belongs to us. And that is, in its own way, more powerful than any alien fantasy. Because it means the capacity for wonder and monumentality sits inside the human animal, waiting for the right conditions to ignite. Your third joke slips in quietly as you start walking again. If aliens did show up, they would probably take one look at us carving foxes into stone and be like, "Oh wow, you guys are already doing a lot. We'll just observe." And then they would leave because humans are exhausting. You follow the walkway onward, leaving the Anunnaki whisper behind like a fading radio station. The stones remain. The night remains. The real mystery remains too. Not whether beings from the sky built this, but why humans on the edge of agriculture felt compelled to create a place so monumental, so symbolic, so carefully shaped. And as you drift forward, calmer now, you realize the hill does not need aliens to be awe-inspiring. It only needs you to stand under the stars and remember what your own species is capable of when it decides that meaning is worth the effort. You keep walking, and the Anunnaki whisper dissolves into the night like smoke. It leaves behind the real world again, which is honestly the best kind of spooky. Modern lights, modern fences, modern interpretive panels that try their hardest to sound neutral while still selling you the drama. You notice them even in the dark. Pale rectangles catching moonlight. They feel like polite reminders that this place is not only ancient, it is also current. It exists inside modern arguments, budgets, politics, and the simple human urge to take a picture and move on. You slow down, because the present has its own weight, sometimes heavier than the past. Here is your mainstream fact for this section. Göbeklitepe is a major archaeological site that has been excavated and studied in modern times, protected under a large shelter, and open to visitors, with ongoing research shaping how it is interpreted and presented. In other words, what you see here is not raw prehistory. It is prehistory filtered through excavation choices, preservation needs, and the modern world's relationship with heritage. You lean on the railing again, and you let your eyes drift across the roof structure above the enclosures. In daylight, it looks like protection. At night, it looks like a modern veil. It keeps rain off the stones, keeps sunlight from bleaching details too fast, keeps tourists from accidentally turning the place into a climbing gym. But it also changes the atmosphere. It changes acoustics, changes how your eyes read the space. You wonder what it felt like when the circles were open to wind and weather and sky, when the stars were the only roof and the firelight was the only spotlight. Historians still argue about conservation choices at sites like this, not because anyone wants to argue for fun, but because preservation always requires trade-offs. Covering a site protects it, but alters it. Leaving it exposed preserves authenticity of experience, but risks damage. And in a place as fragile and valuable as Göbeklitepe, the modern world has to choose which kind of loss it can live with. That is an uncomfortable kind of responsibility. You take a slow breath and taste dust again. Even the dust feels modern now, stirred by walkways and foot traffic. You realize that tourism is not just visitors. It is infrastructure, maintenance, scheduling, and a whole economy of attention. People come because they want to touch deep time, but deep time like any celebrity, gets exhausted when everyone wants a selfie. Your first joke of this section arrives, gentle and sleepy, somewhere. The ancient builders are watching modern visitors walk past the pillars like, yes, yes, very sacred. Anyway, where is the gift shop? And the builders are like, we dragged that pillar for months. Different priorities, same species. You keep walking and the site's modern reality becomes clearer. There are boundaries now, fenced areas, controlled pathways, defined viewpoints. You cannot wander freely. You cannot step into the enclosures. You cannot touch the stones. And that restriction is both frustrating and comforting. Frustrating because your curiosity wants contact. Comforting because you know what humans are like. Give us access and we will carve our initials into a 12,000-year-old pillar and then claim it was for the vibes. We are chaos. We need railings. The modern story also includes archaeology itself. And archaeology is not a single voice. It is teams, institutions, funding cycles, field seasons, debates over interpretation, arguments over publication, and sometimes tension between local needs and international attention. Göbeklitepe sits in Turkey, and its significance is not only scientific, it is cultural, it is national heritage. It is part of local identity. That adds layers to how it is presented to the world. It becomes a symbol, and symbols attract opinions the way lights attract moths. Historians still argue, more broadly, about how archaeological narratives get shaped by modern politics and media. First Temple is not just a label. It is a headline that brings tourists, prestige, and funding. But headlines can flatten complexity. They can make a site feel like a single fact instead of a living debate. The night helps you notice that flattening. It makes you sensitive to what gets emphasized and what gets quietly left out. A quirky tidbit slips in here. Not about aliens, but about modern storytelling. The way Göbeklitepe is framed in the popular media often swings between two extremes. Either mysterious lost civilization or perfectly explained ritual site. When the truth is more interesting because it is unfinished, the site is still being studied. New findings can shift interpretations. Some parts remain unexcavated. The story is still being written, and that should be exciting, not disappointing. But humans love closure. We crave the last page. We crave the final answer. Archaeology rarely gives it. You pause and look out beyond the roof again. The distant lights of modern life shimmer. Somewhere out there, people are eating dinner, scrolling, arguing, laughing, falling asleep. The contrast is almost funny. You're here, leaning over stones from 9500 BCE. While someone in the nearest town is watching a cooking show and deciding whether to order dessert. Time layers like that. The ancient and the ordinary coexist. Your second joke slips in. Imagine telling someone from Göbeklitepe's time that in the future, people would travel here in climate-controlled buses to admire their pillars, then go home and complain about slow Wi-Fi. They would not know what Wi-Fi is, but they would understand complaining. Complaining is universal. You keep walking, and you notice the subtle presence of modern authority around the site. Signs, rules, security considerations. Even after hours, the place feels watched in a practical sense. That is the modern version of sacred protection. Not animal carvings and ritual boundaries, but cameras, fences, schedules. It is still a controlled space, just controlled by different rituals. You think about how the site's original builders also controlled space, creating enclosures that shaped movement and attention. In that way, modern management is a strange echo of ancient design. Different tools, same instinct. Protect what matters. by defining how bodies move. Historians still argue about accessibility versus preservation at major heritage sites. How many visitors is too many? How much infrastructure is necessary? How much interpretation should be provided? Should the site be experienced as raw stone and silence, or as an educational journey with context? There is no perfect answer, only balances. You feel your eyelids grow heavier again, because the modern world is exhausting in its own way. The politics, the management, the constant negotiation. It makes the ancient world almost feel simpler, even though it absolutely was not. The difference is that ancient complexity is distant enough to be soothing, like listening to a storm from inside a safe room. Modern complexity is close enough to poke you. Your third joke arrives gently as you let that poke go. The ancient builders buried the site, and modern humans unburied it. And now modern humans are like, please do not touch, it is fragile. And the ancient builders are like, we know. That is why we buried it. You exhale a tiny laugh, and it disappears into the night. You stop one last time to look down at the pillars. Under the roof, under the modern world's care, they stand in a kind of curated twilight, not fully wild, not fully museum, something in between. And you realize that what you experience here is always going to be a collaboration across time. Ancient intent, modern excavation, your own imagination, and the night itself acting like a soft filter. You breathe in slowly, and you let your mind quiet. You do not need to solve the tension between preservation and access to night. You only need to feel the echoes, the way modern shadows fall over ancient stones, the way modern stories sit on top of ancient ones, the way the hill still holds its power, even when surrounded by guardrails and signage, and the human urge to monetize wonder. You turn toward the last stretch of walkway, and the night feels gentler now, as if the site has shown you its modern face and is ready to let you go. The stars still glitter above, the stones still wait below, and you, walking between modern lights and old shadows, carry both worlds in your sleepy chest as you head toward the final loop, the last quiet lap under the wide Anatolian sky. You follow the walkway into its last curve, and your steps feel slower now. Not because you are tired in a bad way, but because the night has taught your body a different tempo. The hill has done its work. It has filled your mind with stone and stars, with foxes and faceless figures, with feasts and burials and debates that hum softly like distant insects. And now, as you approach the point where you will have to turn away, the space around you starts to feel wider, as if Göbeklitepe is gently loosening its grip. You take one final long look down at the enclosures. The pillars stand pale beneath the roof, and the moonlight gives them a soft, almost underwater glow. It is strange how something so heavy can look so quiet. The carvings are still there, animals frozen mid-stride, snakes forever rippling, birds caught in stone flight. The central pillars still face each other in their endless silent conversation, as if they have not noticed you at all, which is fair. You are a blink to them. Here is your mainstream fact for this final section. Göbeklitepe's monumental enclosures and T-shaped pillars remain among the earliest known large-scale ritual structures, and ongoing research continues to refine how archaeologists interpret its purpose and place in the transition toward more settled Neolithic life. Even as you walk away, the site is not finished being understood. It is still unfolding in human knowledge, like a story being read slowly under a lamp. Historians still argue whether Göbeklitepe represents the earliest temple in a strict sense or a broader ceremonial gathering place that resists later categories. That debate, after everything tonight, feels less like a problem and more like a gentle truth. The past is not obligated to fit your modern vocabulary. You are the one trying to fit your hands around something larger than your grip. You turn slightly and begin your last lap, letting the walkway guide you. The railing is cool under your fingers again. Familiar now. The metal, the roof, the controlled path, the modern structure of access, all of it feels like a frame around a painting. But the painting is not flat. It has depth. It has shadow. It has the weight of human intention. Your first joke of this section arrives quietly as you take that in. You came here thinking you were taking a relaxing night walk, and instead, the hill handed you an existential crisis wrapped in limestone. Very thoughtful. 5 stars. Would be emotionally destabilized again. You glance out toward the horizon. The distant modern lights are still there, but they feel softer now. Less intrusive, like they are part of the same long human thread. The people out there are doing their own rituals. Dinner, prayer, scrolling, laughing, worrying, loving. And you realize that the distance between you and the builders of Göbeklitepe is not as wide as it looks. Different tools, different stories, but the same basic needs: belonging, meaning, a way to face the night without feeling swallowed by it. You let your breathing slow even more. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The fan hum you might have turned on at home almost seems to appear in the wind's whisper here. Your body is heavy in a pleasant way. The kind of heaviness that says sleep is not an enemy. Sleep is a soft place you can return to. The quirky tidbit that settles into your mind now is not a wild theory, but a gentle reminder. Much of Göbeklitepe still remains unexcavated, and what is underground could continue to surprise researchers for years to come. That means the hill is not done. It is still holding chapters. It is still holding rooms you have not seen. Even as you leave, it stays, patient, with secrets pressed under earth like folded blankets. Historians still argue about how much excavation is desirable versus how much should be left for the future. When methods improve and questions evolve, that debate feels like a kind of respect too. Sometimes, leaving something buried is a way of acknowledging you do not have the full right to consume it all at once. It is a rare form of restraint, and humans do not practice restraint often, which is why it stands out. Your second joke slips in as you think about restraint. If humans were truly disciplined, we would not have eaten all the snacks in the first place. Archaeology is basically the same. We should leave some for later. And then someone immediately goes, but what if the later snacks are better? You smile because your mind is floating now, and even jokes feel like feathers. You reach a point where the enclosures begin to slip out of view behind structural beams and the curve of the path. The pillars are still there, but they are partially hidden. That partial hiding feels symbolic, like the hill is easing you out gently rather than pushing you away. You do not get a dramatic final shot. You get a gradual fade, which is exactly what you want, because your brain is ready to drift. You stop once more and look back. The stones are quiet. The animals are quiet. The central pair are still facing each other, their silence unbroken. You think about the people who built them and the people who buried them. You think about the idea that the first temple might be a choice rather than a building. A choice to gather, a choice to carve, a choice to say, this place matters. That choice, in a way, is still alive every time a human walks here and feels something in their chest shift slightly. Your third joke arrives. Soft and affectionate. Somewhere deep into time, an ancient builder is watching you stand here getting emotional. And they are like, yes, correct, it's supposed to feel like that. And then they add, also, please stop calling it the first temple. It's complicated. Even across millennia, the builders want nuance. You turn again, and let the walkway carry you toward the exit. The night air feels a little warmer now. Or maybe that is just your body relaxing. The sky above is still scattered with stars, and you do not try to name them. You just let them be. The hill behind you is still there, holding its circles and its buried rooms and its unanswered questions with quiet dignity. Your steps become softer. Your thoughts become slower. You feel that sleepy, pleasant fog thickening around the edges of your awareness. And that is the cue. The hill has given you enough. It is time to let the images fade into something gentler. Now you begin the wind down, the part where the story stops gripping and starts letting go. You imagine the hill growing smaller behind you, not because it is less important, but because you are carrying it now. Not the stones, of course, just the feeling, the quiet awe, the sense that humans have always been capable of building meaning out of the dark. You picture yourself stepping off the path and onto softer ground. Somewhere safe, somewhere familiar. Your room, your bed, the fan hum, the dim light, your body sinking into a blanket like it was made for you and only you. You let your shoulders drop. You unclench your hands. You allow your jaw to loosen. You let your forehead smooth out. Each part of you gets permission to stop holding itself up. The stars you saw above Göbeklitepe become softer in your mind. Less sharp points and more gentle glows, like distant lanterns. The pillars become silhouettes that blur kindly at the edges. The carved animals become simple shapes, then patterns, then the feeling of being watched over, not by anything threatening, but by the steady patience of the past. Your breathing slows. In, out, in, out. The night sound fades to a hush. The hill is quiet. The world is quiet. And you are allowed to be quiet too. You do not need to solve Göbeklitepe in your head. You do not need to win debates. You do not need to label anything perfectly. You can let the mystery be soft. You can let it sit beside you like a calm companion. You can let it drift away as sleep comes in. Gentle and warm, like a tide moving across sand. The last image you keep is simple. A wide sky, a quiet hill, and a circle of stone holding human intention like a bowl holds water. Then even that image fades, and there is only darkness, safe and familiar, and your breath, steady and slow, guiding you down into rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.